Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Lawrence, and I'm Principal Consultant for CPP Asia Pacific in New Zealand. I used to be Principal Psychologist in CPP in Singapore several years ago. I have a real passion for education and using type in education in particular. And I want to spend the next 10 minutes or so talking to you about my own experiences of using type in the classroom and where I think we should be going with type. Now, when I was a kid, I loved science. I still do, actually. I wouldn't be a psychologist if I didn't. And I think all kids do. They ask questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Where does the sun go at night? Why do we have rainbows? Where did all the dinosaurs go? I was particularly interested in astronomy. My boyhood hero was Carl Sagan, and one of my favorite teachers in primary school, Mr. Kenneth Rosario, really nurtured and encouraged my love of science. He encouraged me to ask questions, no matter how prickly, and he created wonderful lessons for our class. I took my love of science and astronomy to high school, hoping to specialize in physics. I think that's where it all went wrong. Suddenly there was a big difference in how I was taught by Mr. Rosario and how I was taught in high school. It wasn't that the subjects were more complex, but suddenly formulae, memorization, and the infamous 10-year series were touted as being far more important than actual understanding of the subject. The goal seemed to be just about passing the exam, rather than inculcating a love of learning and a love for the subject. I became disengaged and disinterested in the subjects that I was taking, and for a while I thought there was something wrong with me. Maybe I was dumb because I wasn't getting it. So why was I engaged in Mr. Rosario's lessons and disengaged in high school? Well, it appears that Mr. Rosario's lessons actively engaged me as a very clear intuitive. High school subjects were designed and taught in a very clear, sensing way. There were rules, steps, procedures, formulae, linear processes. When I went to university, I discovered a whole new world, and once more I became engaged because I was able to ask questions, explore choices and options, learn independently, and even create my own assignments and allow my creativity and curiosity to flourish. It seems that my educational journey has really been one of peaks and troughs. And it seems that high school education almost all over the world, and the research backs this up, has been designed primarily in a way to suit introverted sensing judges, ISJs. And guess what? The majority of individuals drawn to teaching at primary and high school levels also tend to be ISJs. Who you are is how you teach. When students are typically disengaged in class, we often label them inattentive, playful, lazy, or even dumb. If you look at how students act during silent seat work, the extroverted students are likely to be fidgeting more, tapping their pens, and generally finding ways to get out of their seats, even if they're following instructions, and the introverted students aren't necessarily quiet either. They can give speeches, they can speak up, then they can work in groups. But if they're bored, they're just as likely to get into trouble for talking out of turn as the extroverts. So how do we engage students who aren't engaged? Now, when I was a teacher, this was a big challenge for me as well. Typically, I'd have maybe 15 to 20% of my students who weren't particularly engaged. I didn't know about personality type at the time, but I wish I had. When we did a workshop a few years ago for students at Raffles, we worked with a group of about 60 students who hadn't performed well in their first year. These were all intelligent, enthusiastic, really nice kids. They're also all science students. What was interesting was that when we look at their personality profiles, we found that the majority were ENFPs, dominant, extroverted intuitives. We did a session on learning styles with these students and discovered that their dominant learning preferences were in conflict with the way the lessons were structured. So what could we have done to engage these kids? How could we have changed our teaching styles? This was the challenge we had when we were approached by a school in Brisbane last year to help the teachers understand the value of differentiated learning and how to apply it in their classrooms. Now the school, Redlands College, had already been using type to help their Year 10 students. Now Year 10 is the equivalent of about Secondary 3. They were using it to help them better understand themselves and to support them in their career choices. When comparing each cohort between 2007 and 2013, they observed that there was a pattern to the predominant styles in the student population. This pattern also demonstrated a correlation between type and choice of curriculum streams, as well as student engagement and behavioral problems. When they analyzed the student and teacher data, they found that IJ preferences were predominant in the teachers and EP preferences were predominant in the students. In fact, 32.4% of the Year 10 cohort in 2013 were found to be ENFPs. Again, dominant, extroverted intuitives. We ran a workshop for the Year 10, 11 and 12 teaching staff to look at type theory and differentiated learning. And using this approach, we enable the staff to understand that students learn most effectively when they're provided with the opportunity to use their most effective or dominant learning style, especially if they're learning something new or difficult. If children are supported and encouraged to learn in their most preferred and natural ways, they become more confident and more engaged in learning. We created exercises around differentiated learning to show how these type preferences presented in the classroom. For example, we got teachers split up into extroverts and introverts and asked them to design their ideal classroom. One of the first things we noticed was that all the extroverted teachers gathered around one large flip chart to design their classroom, which was filled with space for movement, exercise mats, movable furniture, and activity areas for group work. The introverted teachers initially worked on their own designs on their own little piece of paper before coming together to discuss their ideas. Their ideal classroom was filled with spaces for individual work, visual aids for reflection, books and windows to the outside, and activities where perhaps only 2 students would work together. We also did an exercise around thinking and feeling. We asked the teachers what their rules were around students handing in assignments late. Now, the thinking teachers immediately said that they would be happy to fail any student who handed in an assignment late. The feeling teachers, on the other hand, said that 9 times out of 10, they would give the student an extension if they liked them. So with thinking and feeling, you also want to consider a student's interactions with you. Some thinking students have no hesitation telling a teacher what they're doing wrong, especially if they're extroverted. Feeling students may struggle with critique. The teacher doesn't like me, so I'm not going to do the work. What's the point? With 32% of the Year 10 students being ENFPs, it would be quite telling if the student felt disengaged if they thought that the teacher didn't like them. We also looked at exercises around sensing and intuition and judging and perceiving. And it became quite revealing to the teachers that who they were was how they taught. And sometimes there was a disconnect between their personality and their students. Over the next 4 months, we worked with the Year 10 Math department to help them refine their lessons to incorporate differentiated learning. We had a monthly coaching meeting with the department to see how their lessons were progressing, and we also asked them to work with at least one student who was disengaged to see if they could use their understanding of type to re-engage them. After the initial one-day workshop, the head of the school commented on the amount of positive type talk in the staff room. Teachers were commenting on the similarities and differences with each other, and even suggesting ways in which to improve their own communication styles. During the 4-month pilot program, the math teachers told us that there was a noticeable change in student engagement. A number of students who had not been previously engaged were starting to show up for lessons, and even showing interest in those lessons. Even the teachers were more enthusiastic as they started sharing ideas for delivering differentiated strategies in their classrooms. The program was a real success in showing that with a little effort and understanding and a little encouragement, differentiated learning by type actually works. So what preferences work best in teaching? Well, every preference is an asset when we teach from the strengths of our personality, but we can flex when either the task or the student's needs requires us to use the other preferences. It's kind of like moving from one room to another in that 16-room type house. I think it's a challenge for education in the 21st century. What are we going to do differently to meet the needs and the personality types of kids in our schools? How do we bring those disengaged students back into the fold? How do we change our curriculums to suit a very diverse classroom? I believe that type is an important tool to start answering those questions. We're certainly going to be exploring it further, and I wish you all the very best in your own exploration of type and learning. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Goodbye.